There are many ways to suffer a traumatic brain injury. Car crashes are the most common cause of traumatic brain injury. Some happen on construction sites. Others happen because of defective products. And children often suffer traumatic brain injuries on playgrounds. So I want to spend a little time talking about what's actually going on and why you're feeling the way you're feeling. It's important to remember that traumatic brain injury is not an event, it's a process. When you break your arm, it's as worse as ever going to be the second after you break it. That's not true for traumatic brain injury. Initially, you might not have a symptom, but a couple of days later, you do. In the days and weeks that follow a traumatic brain injury, there are all sorts of changes that happen in your brain that can and do cause further damage. The brain has basically two different types of matter: white matter and gray matter. Every form of brain activity, every thought, every ability we have involves brain cells sending messages to other brain cells. Brain cells are the gray matter of the brain. The messages they send travel through billions of wires called axons. The axons are the white matter of the brain. The real damage to your brain comes from the fact that these axons are very delicate. That wraps around them, think of a covering of a wire. That starts to rip open. That you'll hear doctors talk about diffuse axonal injury. And when that happens, your cells aren't able to communicate as well with each other. It's actually the reason you have trouble thinking or remembering. It's actually the reason why you're depressed or irritable. It's the reason why it's so hard for you to think or even to sleep, some of you even to smell. In severe traumatic brain injury, the patient is unconscious for a period of hours or even weeks, and there's generally a significant amount of bleeding on the brain. In moderate traumatic brain injury, the patient generally has a shorter period of loss of consciousness and often will have some bleeding on the brain. In mild traumatic brain injury, there is usually no loss of consciousness, and rarely is there bleeding on the brain. The patient will have an altered consciousness, which means he or she will have a period of amnesia, or will look dazed or confused or be slow to answer questions. The mild traumatic brain injury is the most challenging for a lawyer because insurance companies and defense lawyers will try to use the fact that most TBI patients have normal CAT scans and MRIs to argue there is no significant damage to the brain. This is a fallacy, as CT and MR scans almost always miss the axonal injury that causes so many problems. Now, just because doctors will term your brain injury mild does not diminish what you're going through. In fact, people with mild traumatic brain injury can and will suffer lifelong, devastating consequences. For the past 20 years, I've represented traumatic brain injury victims and their families. I understand what you're going through.